I'm Karen Jochelson. I work for the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is a regulator in Great Britain. We were set up in 2006. We are an independent body responsible for promoting the laws affecting people's equality and human rights at work and in daily life. I worked for the Commission for 9 years. My early career was as an academic. I was actually originally a historian, but I was always interested in social problems and how you solve them, and I've gradually moved into a policy framework. So in my role, I work with employers and I help them understand the law and what their legal responsibilities are. And I work with my legal colleagues who may take enforcement action where a company may not be complying effectively with the law. But the outcome we want is a Britain where everybody is able to work to their full potential. So we look at laws, policies and practices that allow that to happen. The Equality and Human Rights Commission is a statutory body, which means our role and our responsibilities are defined in law. One of our roles is that we're responsible for promoting awareness and good practice around equality. Now, equality is very closely linked to diversity, and what it means to me is that we need to ensure that employers provide equal opportunities for everyone to meet their potential. That means employers need to think about how they recruit and how they promote and how they develop staff, and ensure that they're not imposing barriers on staff. The Equality Act of 2010 provides protection for 9 different groups, and everybody will have some aspect or many aspects of these groups. So you have legal protection by age, disability, race, gender reassignment, sex, marriage or civil partnership, religion or belief, sexual orientation, and pregnancy or maternity. And employers have a duty not to discriminate directly against people and must take steps to ensure they don't discriminate indirectly against people. There is some evidence that shows that companies with diverse boards perform far better financially. And I think you could ask the question why. What is it that makes a company that's diverse from the bottom to the top far more effective in the way it conducts itself? The first thing is I think they can attract the best talent. If you're looking in the widest pool, then you have better chance of selecting the best person for the job, regardless of what their background is, whether they're male or female, their race, their sexual orientation. You will have selected the person who, through their experience and competence, can demonstrate they will do the job in the best way for you. The more diverse your company, the better your public reputation. And of course, that will attract people to you because people want to work in a place where they know there are no artificial bars to their progress. If your workforce is diverse, they bring lots of diverse ideas and experience to help you cope with the challenges that the market will throw at you. So you're more likely to be far more innovative as a company facing the challenges you will. And finally, a diverse workforce, and one where people feel they're treated in a fair and respectful way, is less likely to have to bear the cost of continually having to recruit staff and also facing internal grievances and the costs of going to court. So from a business perspective, there are some very good arguments to thinking about how you recruit, how you promote and how you retain your staff, and ensuring that your staff body is diverse and the best one possible to help you do the job you want. For the past 5 years, there's been a spotlight on Britain's top companies to see how they are improving the representation of women on their boards. Now, the UK has a different approach to Europe. Some countries in Europe have imposed quotas, and they've told companies they need to have a certain percentage of women on their boards. Britain took a different route. They've taken a voluntary route. Government has set a target. They asked the top 350 companies to achieve 25% of women on their boards but they have left it to companies to do in the way they want. And now the Equality and Human Rights Commission was interested to see how effective the voluntary target approach had been and what companies were doing to achieve it. So we undertook an inquiry and published our report in 2016. We found that for the period we looked at, just 100 companies out of the FTSE 350 had in fact met that 25% mark. So we went off to look at why, because boards were still largely male. What we looked at was the way companies undertook their appointment process to their boards. We found that companies still relied heavily on their old boys networks. They relied on the people they knew, and the problem here is it's likely to be a small circle of individuals. So you're not if that's your approach, you're not likely to be selecting the best talent available. They also didn't advertise or publicize these roles widely. And again, the problem here is if you're not advertising your vacancy, qualified women who may be suitable for those posts won't know to apply for them. We also found that companies were too reliant on the concept of chemistry and fit in their selection process. And the problem with this is it's really a code for the selection of people just like the current post holders. Having identified the problem, we then set out 6 steps that we think companies can take to improve their selection process. And you can find this 6-step guide on our website. So what needs to change? Companies need to reduce their reliance on personal networks. They need to publicize more widely. They need to look at their appointment process and know that they're using objective and measurable criteria and treating people in a fair and similar way through that interview and selection process. They also need to consider setting themselves targets, and this means they need to understand what the obstacles are in the way and set themselves a target and then monitor and report back on their progress. And finally, companies also need to take a long-term view. They need to look at their internal talent pipeline. They need to look at how they can develop women in their workforce so that they can move into positions that mean they may be eligible for seeking roles as executive directors or as non-executive directors over the next 5 to 10 years. Great Britain has an extensive legal framework that sets out the rights and responsibilities of employers and employees to ensure that women aren't discriminated against when they're pregnant on maternity leave or returning from maternity leave. The Equality and Human Rights Commission decided to examine how effectively this legal framework was working. So we recently, in 2016, we published our findings based on interviews with 3,000 women who had been pregnant or had a child within a particular time period, and 3,000 employers who had managed a woman who was pregnant or returning from maternity leave in that same time period. And we compared their experiences. Now, what was very positive was that many employers said they valued women in their workplace, and they didn't think that managing women who were pregnant or on maternity leave was difficult. But when we asked the women those same questions, we found a very different story. So of our sample, 11% of women said they had been dismissed or made redundant when other similar staff were not, or had been so poorly treated they felt forced to leave their job. And if you extrapolate that upwards, that means up to 53,000 women a year could be in that position. 20% of our sample said they were harassed and experienced lots of negative comments from their colleagues once they were pregnant or when they asked to work flexibly and it was agreed. And that would mean up to 100,000 women every year experience that. And finally, we found that 10% of our sample, or close to 53,000 women, said they were unable or they faced difficulties taking time off from work to attend their antenatal appointments, which is a right that is protected in law. So what needs to change? Well, employers and employees need to understand their legal rights and obligations better. So the Equality and Human Rights Commission has provided new guidance and worked with other statutory and non-statutory providers of guidance to ensure the right information is easily available for employers and employees. But there's a lot that employers can do themselves. They need to look at their policies and their practices and ensure that these are compliant with the legal requirements. They also need to make sure that their line managers understand their obligations that are placed on them and operate them effectively. And this is important because the way the line manager treats their team and members of staff has a direct effect on the reputation of the company and how well it is regarded and how well people do their jobs. And finally, companies need to think about their workplace culture. What we think would be helpful is very open communication between line managers and employers from the start of declaring a pregnancy all the way through to returning to work and easing yourself back into the workplace. Better communication means both sides understand what is expected and how to manage this short period while you may be absent from work. Employers say they value the contribution women make. What they need to do is ensure that their policies and practices help bring that to life, so women know that they are valued employees, that companies want to retain them and will continue to invest in their development, even while they're pregnant or once they've had children. Britain has a large pay gap between men and women. What the pay gap is an indicator of how women are progressing in society and how that compares to male progress. Now, there are lots of reasons for the pay gap. Some of them are due to individual choices. So women traditionally have gone into less well-paid or caring professions, whereas men have gone into better paid professions. Some of it is due to choices once women have children and they're often the main carer. So women tend to work part-time or take some time out work and then want to return. The question is, what can an employer do about this? Now, some of the causes for the pay gap will sit squarely with the employer. An employer should be looking at the way they grade jobs and award their employees to be absolutely sure that they are paying the same salary for similar or like work. And that is enshrined in the Equality Act of 2010 in its provisions around equal pay. But there's also a broader range of policies that may have an impact on a pay gap within a company. Companies need to consider how they train and promote individuals, whether they provide the opportunity for flexible work, and then how easy they make it for women to return back to the workforce full-time. Some companies are beginning to look at flexible career paths, acknowledging that women may want to work part-time for a few years, but they still play a valuable role and have excellent skills to contribute. So they develop a slightly different career path that allows them to continue progress and contributing to the company. In Great Britain, companies of a certain size will soon have an obligation to report on their pay gap. We would also recommend that where a company has a pay gap, they also explain the causes of the pay gap and set themselves an action plan to explain what it is they're going to do to remedy it. And some of the things employers may want to think about are how they set their pay at recruitment or promotion, whether their policies around flexible working allow them to retain their staff. They may want to measure their retention of female staff and also the progress of female staff through to the more senior levels of the organisation. And if there are challenges there, try and identify what they could do to remedy this. And finally, companies should be thinking about whether they can offer more flexible career paths so they don't lose the talent they already have and they continue to develop and benefit from the skills of those women. And in this way, companies may be able to reduce their own pay gap within the company, and that will contribute overall to reducing the wider pay gap in society.